Before I proceed to the main body of my content for this video, and it can be seen as an addendum, a complement, as well as just additional information, perhaps buttressing some of the ideas that Coltain presented in his video, I want to first plug in his video. For those of you who have not yet watched the video, I can say with no reservations whatsoever that you absolutely must. It is, in my assessment, one of the best videos ever produced in the MGTOW community. The title itself, Biology, Culture, Ideology, is not particularly impressive, but the visuals and graphics are really what make this video stand out. Coltain brought all of his graphical, artistic, and visual prowess to the fore for this video, and you really see it. What makes this video unique is the attempt to reconcile certain ideas via the visual method, using complex graphics, making use of complex software tools, say in Adobe and so on and so forth. So really, really exceptional video, one of the best MGTOW content productions ever in my opinion. But when you propose certain ideas, of course, there are new questions that arise, and new questions that should ideally be answered, or at least one should attempt to answer them. And you can look at this video as an attempt to answer at least one of them. Now, in the video, and as I said, you absolutely must watch this video. It's fantastic. There are several correlations proposed, correlations at a certain date and time approximately, that go hand in hand with the introduction of birth control. And I've explained privately with Coltain, and we've had discussions on this, and as well as CS MGTOW, that the best case scenarios where we actually attempt to explain these correlations. I feel personally deeply uncomfortable presenting correlations, but sort of leaving them to hang in the air, as it were. And my hope is, at some point in time in the not too distant future, that through much cogitation and rumination, that we might be able to, in fact, arrive at some rather steady and firm hypotheses, at the very least, that can be backed up by data that we can find on related subjects and indeed on the subject matter at hand. That, which is to say, why do we see, for example, spikes in violence correlating with this phenomenon? And I'm not looking for an answer now. I already have a lot of ideas on that. But perhaps at some point in time, say in the context of a MGTOW talk, Coltain and I can propose certain hypotheses. But what I can do today, what I would like to do today, is absolutely address one of the major points. Now, Coltain in that video points out that despite no-fault divorce being introduced in 1969 by the illustrious Grade B actor Ronald Reagan in California, the divorce already began to shoot up prior to that, just after the introduction of the pill. And even though I've known about this for quite some time, what I'm about to talk about, I'm genuinely surprised that few to none have talked about the actual effect the pill has had on the human female in terms of its physiology. Now, before I proceed, and the effect has been immense, and the effects of the birth control pill on female human physiology really dovetail well with the data that Coltain presented, and that's what I'll be focusing on, the relationship of divorce and relationship breakdown within the context of birth control. Let me first explain the premise of this before I go into the details of specifically what's happening. Now, we tend to, in, say, 2016, to think about birth control as just sort of this pedestrian, banal, everyday thing. But we tend to forget what it actually means and what it actually implies. Which is to say that we're talking about something that fundamentally changes the biochemistry, the hormonal makeup, and particularly the physiology of human females who take it. Now, it might be a common thing. It might be readily available, and it has been for many, many decades. But that doesn't change the gravity of its impact on the female human body. An analogy might be, and I often make these analogies, an analogy to exogenous steroids, for example. So, for example, if you inject copious amounts of exogenous testosterone, say a gram every 7 days, you can expect some pretty serious side effects, both beneficial and not so beneficial, harmful potentially. So, because steroids, for example, aren't really in common parlance, yeah, many people use them, but they're still considered the sort of oddity. But birth control, of course, which arguably has, to some degree, very similar effects in terms of reshaping the hormonal balance in the human female to injecting exogenous testosterone, because it's a common everyday thing, basically, you forgot to take the pill and you take the pill, we tend to forget about the gravity and the implications of rearranging essentially the human body, in this case the human female body, and what the implication of the pill is, specifically for relationships and marriage. Now, anecdotally, it's been well known for decades that the pill, in fact, rearranges a woman's perception of attraction and psychology, but it's only been in recent decades, I'd argue in the last 10 years or so, that this has been studied in great depth. In the simplest of terms, in layman's terms, to use a very extreme example, and obviously this is not what's actually meant, a woman might be attracted to a man while she's on birth control, and then when she goes off birth control, she might find the man smells like rancid pork loin or what have you. Now, that's not literally what happens, but everything I'm talking about, of course, will be linked in the lobar. Specifically, the most recent research on this shows certain things about birth control and its effect on the human female. So I'm going to read off a bit of this article, and of course there are other articles in Lobar to give you an idea of what's going on specifically, and then I'll talk about something else. This year, 2.25 million Americans will get married, and 1 million will get divorced. Could birth control be to blame for some of these breakups? Recent research suggests that the contraceptive pill, which prevents women from ovulating by fooling their body into believing it is pregnant, could affect which types of men women desire. Going on or off the pill during a relationship, therefore, may tempt a woman away from her man. It's all about the scent. Hidden in a man's smell are clues about his major histocompatibility complex, MHC genes, which play an important role in immune system surveillance. Studies suggest that females prefer the scent of males whose MHC genes differ from their own, a preference that has probably evolved because it helps offspring survive. Couples with different MHC genes are less likely to be related to each other than couples with similar genes are, and their children are born with more varied MHC profiles and thus more robust immune systems. A study published in August in the Proceedings of the Royal Society B, however, suggests that women on the pill undergo a shift in preference towards men who share similar MHC genes. The female subjects were more likely to rate these genetically similar men's scents via t-shirt the men had worn for 2 nights as pleasant and desirable after they went on the pill as compared with before. Although no one knows why the pill affects attraction, some scientists believe that pregnancy, or in this case the hormonal changes that mimic pregnancy, draws women toward nurturing relatives. Women who start or stop taking the pill then may be in for some relationship problems. A study published last year in Psychological Science found that women paired with MHC-similar men are less sexually satisfied and more likely to cheat on their partners than women paired with MHC-dissimilar men. So a woman on the pill, for example, might be more likely to start dating an MHC-similar man, but he could ultimately leave her less sexually satisfied. Then, if she goes off the pill during the relationship, the accompanying hormonal changes will draw her even more strongly towards the MHC-dissimilar men. These immune genes may have a powerful effect in terms of how well relationships are cemented, says University of Liverpool psychologist Craig Roberts, co-author of the August paper. And this was published in 2008. So basically, a lot of this has been coming out in the last decade or so, and there's more to mention. There are more data that support this idea, and these are data that have been presented by researchers in Scotland with reference to masculine features in the face. So they tested a bunch of women on the pill or off the pill, looking at different male profiles, facial profiles, to see which kind of men that they chose. And the results, and you can read it, it's all in the low bar, the results were that Women who were off the pill tended to choose more masculine profiled men with more masculine features, I suppose, more angular jaws, maybe more facial hair, that sort of thing, sort of testosterone-laden men, whereas women on the pill chose sort of softer-featured men. And this kind of dovetails well with the research that was presented just prior, the idea that there might be almost a sort of a relative complex going on there, that when you're on the pill as a female, you're more attracted to sort of at least what would be the perception of a sort of nurturing, softer kind of man. So now we have 2 bits of data, as well as some other studies which reference the same thing without actually naming specifically the genes, the major histocompatibility complex genes. But this has been known anecdotally for decades, and certainly in the recent decade, it's been well researched, and we really have firm evidence that this isn't just anecdotal. This really happens, both by means of examining women's preferences and interest in different kinds of male facial features, vis-a-vis being on the pill or off the pill, and most importantly, probably essentially the interference and the mucking up of histocompatibility, the major histocompatibility complex genes, the MHC genes. Now, one of Coltane's major theses in the video, and I'm only handling this particular datum. There are other data that need to be talked about, as I said. Hopefully we'll come up with some good, solid hypotheses, at the very least, for explaining those data. But in this particular datum, I think the evidence is quite startling. So once again, you have to really watch the video to see what I'm talking about, because his visuals are just a lot better than anything I could present. The divorce rate goes up prior to, say, in the context of the United States, the introduction of no-fault divorce. You see sharp spikes before that, roughly correlating, or roughly, but very much closely correlating with what we see with the introduction of birth control. Now, it's not as if the fundamental mechanisms of birth control have changed over the decades. There have been new types, but when we talk about the pill, which was the only available form of birth control for the longest time, we now know that it absolutely has an effect on the way women perceive male facial features and the way women perceive, or essentially how the major histocompatibility complex genes work. I'll just refer to them as MHC from now on. That, of course, is going to mess some things up. So let me offer you a hypothetical scenario which almost certainly has occurred many, many times in the previous decades, whether in the context of a relationship or a marriage. A woman meets a man while she's on birth control. She's sexually active. They have a relationship for a couple of years. They contemplate marriage. Now, they get married, and the woman decides to go off birth control because she's deciding or considering having a child. And, a couple of years in the marriage, she's just not feeling it anymore. He's not as attractive anymore. There's no real explanation. She can't really figure it out, but she's just not feeling it. He's beginning to smell like that rancid pork loin. And almost certainly this would then correlate with her coming off the pill. Similarly, in the case of women who have already had children, well, I could imagine a scenario that, once again, almost certainly has occurred, where you have a woman who got off the pill, felt kind of weird, but, figured, well, he's my husband, so I'll mate with him and have a kid. And it just goes downhill from there when she gets off the pill and things are just kind of all wonky. Now, this is not something that's particularly new. We know, for example, that ovulating women dress more provocatively, more sexily, if you will, than women who aren't ovulating. That is to say, they're attracted to a different kind of man. So it's all in the hormones and the physiology. This change in the MHC genes, basically, or essentially the interference that's being run, there's no change in the genes themselves, the interference that's being run vis-a-vis the pill and the MHC genes can account, I will argue, for a lot of the problems, and they even suggest it in this article, that women encounter when they come off the pill. Now, of course, it's not framed. This isn't conscious. Just like a woman who's ovulating isn't necessarily conscious of it. She's not saying, oh, I'm ovulating, therefore I'm attracted to this type of man, and I'm going to wear a miniskirt and have my jugs hang out. That's not what she's thinking. Who knows what she's thinking? Oh, I want to look good for myself, or all these kinds of rationalizations. In a similar fashion, it's unlikely women are saying, well, I got off the pill and this is affecting my major histocompatibility complex with a partner, so I can't find a differentiated partner now. And that's not what they're thinking. This is all just autopilot. This is, these are hormones, physiology, and the subsequent psychology that basically is derived from that. They don't know what's going on. But what they do know is that they're not feeling it anymore. And when they're not feeling it anymore, women who tend to be quite impulsive, probably within a relatively short span of time, will say, well, I'm not feeling it anymore, let's divorce. So a couple of years in the marriage, she gets off the pill and thinking, well, I'm not very attracted to him anymore. Why am I married to him? So in this particular case, this datum is well explained by what we know of birth control and its effect on women and the way they interact with men, in addition to the way women's perception of male facial features, which are often a good guide as to testing immune system health and what have you, as well as just to show you how masculine a man is, which is often indicative of other things, his overall health and so on and so forth. That interferes with that. And I would argue that the data that are being presented here are pretty solid, which is to say that we know now, it's well documented, that the female birth control pill runs interference with the MHC genes. We know that it affects facial features and facial perception, and basically what women are attracted to. And if women are on the pill for years, and let's face it, at the time when the pill was first introduced, say from the early 60s onwards, there probably wasn't this amount of information on it. So women, like anything that's newly introduced, they were chowing down on it like breakfast cereal. I'm reminded of, Deanna Bull, the Breakfast of Champions. Well, I'm not comparing the two necessarily, but I'm saying that they didn't really think about the consequences. Just like back in the day, people smoked and thought it was just a cool thing to do. So I'll just go on the pill for years. Imagine a woman who's been on the pill nonstop for 4 or 5 years and a relationship comes off of it, and what that's going to do to her physiology and the hormones in her body, and how she interprets her own attractiveness to certain men that she's involved with, can have a massive effect. So I'm going to argue here that if you do see the spike in the jump in divorce rate, that does seem to correlate with the introduction of birth control. We actually have a mechanism of explanation as to why that happened and how it occurred. So at least one datum mentioned by Coltane is well supported by external evidence showing that, there's a massive effect on it. And women being impulsive, want to end their relationships, they're not attracted anymore, they're not feeling it anymore. How many instances do we know of where we hear that women aren't feeling it anymore? And indeed, how many instances of that can be essentially attributed to the mucking up of their ability to interpret major histocompatibility complex genes for, optimize mating and optimize offspring reproduction. Well, the exact details, we'd have to do surveys and what have you, but there's strong evidence. Let's just say there's strong evidence. But that's not all. In the future, as I mentioned, we absolutely need to talk about the other correlations. It's not enough in my assessment. I've told Coltane this, and I think he would agree. I don't want to speak for him necessarily, that say we have these correlations. Let's just sort of let them hang in the air. I've just explained one. I think it's well grounded in evidence to back up what exactly potentially happened, and I think likely happened. The scenario I've depicted, these hypotheticals, it absolutely has happened, probably to a T in some cases. Everyone knows stories like this, but it's actually backed up by the evidence and the science as well. For other things such as violence and what have you, further investigation is required. But in this particular case, this particular datum, we have the information, we have the science, we have the evidence. So I'm not necessarily one for, a one shoe size fits all explanation. However, if that is what the data suggests, if the data are pointing us in a certain direction, we can ignore that. It seems, certainly in the case of divorce, birth control had a preeminent, and I would argue probably primary effect as compared to other things like no-fault divorce. So if a woman wanted to engage in no-fault divorce, and of course divorce rates do shoot up there as well, the interference with the MHC genes and what have you absolutely would further that and bolster it and accelerate it, and would indeed offer a premise in terms of the psychology as well as an impetus to follow through with that kind of thing. That is, engaging in divorce, decoupling oneself, which is why the title of this video is The Sundering. It is the sundering of human female physiology from complex mechanisms that evolved in our hominid ancestors and indeed probably all mammalian species over millions of years. And the pill is now running interference with that, and it's making women effectively make bad choices without them knowing about it. Now, the articles don't go so far as to say, oh, women should completely get off the pill, but there are other cases. We know a lot of women have allergic reactions to the pill, don't do so well, have breakouts. I mean, the pill is major hormonal business, if you think about it. And people don't forget that often because it's such a common thing. It's banal, get on the pill. It's not like you're sticking needles in your ass or your quadriceps or something. It's a little bit different. People think that. And I'm not necessarily in the two are perfect, can be perfectly equated, exogenous steroids or testosterone in the pill, but there are profound hormonal effects, and they're well documented. And I think this backs up this particular data that Coltane had mentioned and presented visually in his graph. So once again, absolutely check out his video. It's phenomenal, in largest measure because of the visual content. He's very skilled at this graphical thing. One of the most skilled people on YouTube probably, but certainly the most skilled in the MGTOW community. And for that reason, yeah, it definitely belongs to, say, the MGTOW Hall of Fame video. So check it out. This video can be seen as complementary, an addendum, additional information, but it's important in trying to figure out the ultimate causes for these things that we try to link all the information we can find and come up, at the very least, with plausible hypotheses. I'd argue now this isn't just plausible. We have extremely powerful correlations that I would argue could even be perceived, rightly so, as causative. Although correlation does not imply causation, I think in this case it's so strong, the evidence, that it's hard to just look past that. So everyone, thanks for watching, and I will check you out later. And once again, absolutely check out Coltane's video. If you haven't, you're really missing something. But swing on over, check it out, and sub to his channel if you haven't done that either. So everyone, take care and enjoy the rest of your week. Bye-bye.